Hello, everybody. Welcome to Movies by McManus, the podcast where we break down movies, comics, TV, books, whatever kind of media you're into, in the context of who created it and what effect it's trying to have on the world. I'm your host, Greg. I'm with my brother, Mike, as always. And today we're going to be breaking down Poisoner-in-Chief, Sidney Gottlieb, and the CIA Search for Mind Control by Stephen Kinzer. Now, so this is the second MKULTRA book that we've done. The first one was Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s by Tom O'Neill. Now, what I kind of like, I kind of like how we're doing two different MKUltra books, is that Stephen Kinzer is a very, you could describe him as he's an official narrative author. And he's actually gotten some criticism in the past of this, especially he has written a lot about the CIA's overthrows of Latin American countries. And a lot of people kind of said in their books, he takes the CIA's word for a lot of things. It's kind of...
What could go wrong there?
It's point by point what the CIA is willing to admit to. Where what they are willing to admit to is already pretty horrific. And especially with the fact that, this is years later, so there's more things that the CIA can't say didn't happen.
It's an interesting concept because you think about, people that eventually pass away, and then how many steps removed is the CIA now, for instance, from JFK or something like that. So exactly. Will there eventually become a time where certain things that were completely off the table as far as being revealed can get revealed? Also, I just want to say quickly this, because you mentioned the Chaos episode, which was our first episode. Yes. This will be another one for you guys who want to go crazy in the comments.
No, I know, which is also why I'm glad we're doing another CIA one.
We had some interesting people chiming in about that one.
We did. We had some, I don't know.
Somebody was just straight up yelling the other day, don't ever say that again. Thank you for watching. That's cool.
We used the wrong terminology when describing Charles Manson. I don't think we actually did. I think
whatever. I don't care. Keep it coming. You can yell at us all you want as long as you're watching. That's fine.
But also, Stephen Kinzer. He's a different kind of author than Tom O'Neill is, because Tom O'Neill,
he's got no dog in the fight.
Yes, exactly. And Tom O'Neill definitely doesn't stick to official narrative, where he's no. Where Tom O'Neill's writing style is all right, this is what you say has happened. Let me make up my own mind.
Yeah, I heard a great quote about the CIA recently, specifically what you were talking about in Latin America, because that preceded JFK being assassinated.
Yes.
And it's it was put, I'm forgetting who said it, but it was put brilliantly. It's so they're just going to go, around the world overthrowing governments, but they're going to stop at our own country.
Exactly. And if you... Oh, I forget his name. I didn't think we were going to get into JFK this early.
Well,
I forget the lawyer's name, but the lawyer who basically brought forward the court case claiming that the JFK assassination was a coup d'etat. He said, if this same series of events happened in any other country,
you would call it what it was.
You would call this a coup d'etat.
Right.
But since it happened in America, people do not want to admit that.
Because, that's not supposed to be what we are, you know?
Exactly. But, and then a lot of Stephen Kinzer, his book is cataloging what they admit to, but just by having that, you can kind of make your own decisions of if this is what they're willing to admit to, there must be a whole other...
So break down for people exactly what they're willing to admit to.
All right. Maybe I'll start with kind of the beginning of this book, how MKUltra kind of came about. MKUltra really came out of the germ bomb experiments during World War II. Basically, during World War II, we were obviously working on the nuclear bomb. So the nuclear bomb is this new technology that, American scientists really weren't sure if it was going to work or not. They definitely didn't think it would be as powerful as it ended up being. So while they were coming up with the nuclear bomb, they also had this idea for the germ bomb that basically, if we're going to invade Germany or Japan, we're going to drop a bomb that's going to spread disease throughout Germany or throughout Japan, killing off...
It's going to spread a novel coronavirus. No.
It is. They were basically developing a disease that would kill off the population so that we can invade them easier.
So dark.
According to the book, because of course, as I say, he goes by official narrative, it was never completed. The nuclear bomb gets dropped in Japan, obviously, and the nuclear bomb is way more devastating than anybody thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
Nobody realized how powerful this bomb was going to be. And then once that happened, kind of all the germ bomb technology kind of went to the side because
it was so devastating and they didn't have to come up with anything.
That's according to the theories. The theories of, or at least what CIA says, is we didn't have to develop this technology anymore because the nuclear bomb was so powerful.
Yeah.
That suddenly germ bomb became secondary.
And what is Stephen Kinzer's background as far as, like, why is he a party line type of guy? Like, is he former government?
I don't believe he's former government. I believe that he's he's been a journalist like his entire career, basically. I don't know if, like,
is he just like trying to be taken seriously?
I really think that it's just he's trying to be taken seriously.
Yeah. Doesn't want to, like,
I think it's more credential wise.
Right.
Kind of, he doesn't want to take the risk of, like,
conspiracy theorist.
Exactly. But so all these germ bomb scientists, they kind of need to switch gears, and it's around this time that LSD is discovered.
Yep.
And LSD is basically seen as, like, this could be the safe nuclear bomb. We have a bomb that can covertly drop LSD over a city that's about to be invaded. LSD, it incapacitates soldiers and civilians for a while, but doesn't really have, at least in smaller doses, doesn't really have too many long-term effects. And if you were to drop it, you'd have minimal civilian casualties, but everybody would be incapacitated.
So they're actually...
then invade a city and take it over.
They actually wanted to drop a bomb of LSD?
At least the early stages was the idea.
Well, how would that even work? Like, emitting...
It was...
Like, because LSD has to be ingested.
Well, they also didn't really understand the drug too much at this time, but they thought it would spread basically like how a germ would spread. Basically how a disease of, like, it could spread person to person. The effects of LSD could spread.
Not how it works.
Well, now we know that's obviously not how that works. But he talks about this in this book. It actually, there was kind of a test of if we're able to develop something that could be dropped covertly that would spread person to person in San Francisco in the early 50s. They kind of dropped this aerosol that basically contained this red dye that was relatively harmless into San Francisco to see how many people it would affect. And it basically affected all of San Francisco and parts of Oakland. This was in the early 50s with pretty much no side effects. So they knew that something like this was possible.
What do you mean it affected people with no side effects?
I mean, like, it was a red dye, so it was like a lot of people in San Francisco and Oakland basically like started reporting that there was like this red dye or red fluid like in their stool or in their urine.
Gotcha, but it didn't actually do anything.
But it didn't actually like do anything harmful for them. But it was like kind of the
fucking
beginnings
creepy, dude.
of like, we're willing to do these experiments on American people in a major American
innocent like civilians.
Innocent civilians. And it also started the idea of like something like this is possible.
Right.
Of like, we can drop something and then it would transfer from person to person. They thought that was going to be LSD. And kind of this is where Sidney Gottlieb comes in. In the late 50s, forget the exact year. It's in the late 50s or late 40s or early 50s that Sidney Gottlieb officially starts working for the CIA. And he's put in charge of these LSD experiments. Of basically, we're going to set up these sites in occupied areas of Germany, in occupied areas of Japan, and there were some parts of China that like weren't really occupied but like had a large military presence. And these are the areas where we're going to basically be doing LSD experiments on people against their will. Where in the military at this time, they were doing LSD experiments, but like they couldn't go so far with them because they were doing it on military personnel, where if you have a captured former German soldier or a captured Japanese soldier, you could basically experiment on them until they're dead.
Right.
And so Sidney Gottlieb, it's LSD. Sometimes it will be LSD mixed with another drug, mixed with like heroin or something, and do these experiments on these basically prisoners of war, or sometimes just vagrants that happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. That would be taken by the U.S. government, and they'd be experimented on.
I mean, you know, sounds like something a great country would do. You know, that's like, I've never felt more patriotic than listening to this. Yeah, they would, you know, poison people they captured with heroin. Oh, man. Dark shit.
And a lot of like kind of the torture techniques of kind of like these torture techniques of getting someone to reveal their secrets,
right,
or like these human experiments that they were doing using drugs,
which by the way has never worked at all. Like even with waterboarding, that's the whole point.
Exactly.
It does not work.
It
does not work.
But a lot of them they like got from the Japanese scientists, because a lot of people know about Operation Paperclip, where we were rounding up Nazi scientists after World War II. At the same time, we were also rounding up Japanese scientists.
And they were into experimenting with people's minds?
They were into experimenting with people's minds. They were into these kind of humans experiments almost just as much as the Nazis were. Of people really overlook the amount of war crimes that Japan did in China during World War II. And these Chinese prisoners were almost tortured just as bad as the Germans were doing in the Holocaust.
Our friend Bill, who goes to Japan a lot, he said there's actually a memorial, like a museum for that time period, and it's a very controversial place because of that reason. Like,
well, even in modern day in Japan, like, I mean, you can't ignore the fact you can't ignore what they were doing. There's a movie that just came out called Midway, and in Midway, a lot of people, the final shot of Midway, there's a text that comes up and it says this movie is dedicated to the American and Japanese soldiers who fought at Midway. And a lot of people don't like the fact that they said the Japanese soldiers, because in China and in the Pacific Islands, for years, for generations, people still did not get over how terribly the Japanese treated them while they were being occupied, and the amount of just torture that these people were that the Chinese were subjected to. But anyway, if we get back to MKUltra and kind of our LSD experiments, according to Stephen Kinzer, well, Stephen Kinzer doesn't mention it that much, but it's my belief, at least, that the ideas of a germ bomb were still being developed long after World War II. Because
by Americans who are...
By Americans.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of explain why. One, it was always said by the Koreans and the Chinese during the Korean War that the Americans were using germ bombs. In fact, the Chinese government set up a massive vaccination program in Manchuria, which is the area of China that's closest to Korea, and in North Korea, to basically try to vaccinate the entire population, because they were under the belief that America was using germ bombs against them.
Damn, Bill Gates was around back then? That's why I'm here, folks. You know, I'm not smart. He knows what he's doing. I drop a stupid line from time to time.
Well, I just read a lot of books. But
Bill Gates sucks.
By
the way, I tried to watch the fucking Netflix documentary on Bill Gates. It's the most self-serving, clearly
Bill Gates did a fucking
it's
Netflix
so bad. It's like a series. I don't mean to get off topic, but it's literally so bad, dude. I tried to watch it. Clearly a crew of his minions just did this it's like North Korean fucking worship, and it's just, I don't even know how. He probably paid Netflix to put it on there.
We have a fucking billionaire worship culture in this fucking country. Dude,
I couldn't get through it. It was I
don't want to watch a fucking documentary about a billionaire.
Well, dude, I don't like Bill Gates, but I just was all right, what's going into the, I'm trying to see. I watched a Kevin Hart Netflix thing recently. It was very fascinating just to see what he goes through to get to where he's at. But I thought it was going to be like that. All right, whatever, shit about Microsoft and stuff. And it was just dude, it was this weird ass hero worship thing.
Yeah.
Bizarre. Anyway.
I do not like Bill Gates. I do not think he's trying.
I do not like Bill Gates and ham. I will not eat Bill Gates.
I don't think he's trying to microchip people. But there are other reasons why I don't like him.
So you're part of the deep state too, huh?
Part of the deep
that
state
sucks.
Too. But how the germ bombs in Korea, how it kind of relates to MKUltra is during the Korean War, there are several American soldiers who come forward and say they witnessed America committing war crimes. One of killing prisoners of war, but one of the main and one of the kind of sticks out is that they were saying, yeah, America is dropping germ bombs on Korea. We're using these biological germ.
Who was saying that?
This is why it's iffy.
Right.
It was a group specifically of...
It's a couple guys on Twitter.
United States soldiers who were captured by the Koreans and then started yeah.
You can't really take that seriously.
Which is why.
Yeah.
Which is why you can't really take
Again, going back to the point that torture doesn't work, because that's exactly what you get is false information. Yes. People just say anything to get out of it.
When people at home are hearing the news that these American soldiers are basically confirming what China had said of China keeps saying America is using germ bombs against us. Everybody believes this is just anti-American propaganda. And now these American soldiers are saying we drop germ bombs. People in America are starting to think maybe we actually did something we weren't supposed to. Maybe that this technology of like we can drop a bomb and it will spread a disease actually exists.
Well, that's like
I don't know which I believe, because it's also just like, one, China has a reason to lie and make it up.
Well,
two, these soldiers are basically captured and who knows what they're willing to say.
The problem is, it's like this thing, the summit they just had with Biden and Putin. So like Biden's doing an interview with, an American press, and they're asking him questions. They're like, oh, well, we hear that you're going to aid Iran with whatever. And he goes, well, no, I mean, that's not even true. Like, that's just something that, Americans want to say and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, who do you believe? Because, okay, yeah, Putin's a liar, but our government's lies too. So it's like he's, it's like the same concept of like, yeah, China would have a vested interest in spreading that about us, but also we would have an interest in not sharing that information.
And there was like a pandemic during, like there was major diseases being spreaded during the Korean War in North Korea and in parts of China, which...
What pandemic was that?
I don't know exactly what disease.
It wasn't a worldwide thing.
No.
Yeah.
It was just there were a lot of diseases that were being spread.
That could be attributed to something like that?
Could, but it also could be they were at war and things weren't very sanitary.
Right.
And disease gets spread around easily.
Right.
So I don't know. That is iffy. There are people who believe that we had germ bomb technology and that we used it in Korea, but there are also people who are saying that's just Korean and Chinese propaganda to make us look bad during the war.
Sure.
But after these Americans come forward,
how many people came forward? Americans.
It was like it was a small group.
Yeah, it was like whoever was captured in that.
No, it was very small. It was like 3 or 5 of them.
Right. Did anyone else corroborate
it was
that?
Like national news.
Sure, but I mean, did other people come forward eventually, or?
I don't think so.
Yeah. It's hard to say.
But that was like the main focus of after those captured Americans had said we committed war crimes, the official stance of the United States government was that they were brainwashed, and said that the Koreans and the Chinese had discovered the secret to mind control, and that these Americans, they did believe what they were saying, but it's because that the Koreans had found the secret to mind control and had put that idea into their head. And also, I should say, every soldier who claimed we used germ technology later recanted. So
again, it's like, did someone come to them and say, by the way, you're taking that story back, otherwise we're going to fucking bury you in the mountain somewhere?
So this is when...
Because, who the fuck knows?
This is when kind of the focus of the LSD experiments shift.
Yeah.
This is now 1953, and the U.S. government, I mean, they're well aware that the Koreans didn't discover the secret to mind control, but they start to think, well, is something like this possible? Is there a drug or a series of events that we could use on an enemy soldier to make them believe they did something that they didn't, or convince them to switch sides and reveal their secrets?
Right.
So Sidney Gottlieb believes that LSD is the key to this. And the LSD experiments, they take a switch in 1953, and instead of using it as kind of a bioweapon during war, it's going to be a mind control weapon now.
Right.
And 1953 is when Frank Olson comes into the picture. Frank Olson, who is the main focus of the documentary Wormwood.
Great doc.
Which it is. It is a great doc. I like it as a companion.
It's a good doc
because
I don't know if it's a great doc.
It's a good one. I like how they got like famous actors to play the people and like the recreations.
At first I was kind of like, oh, are we doing this? Like, and then I was totally into it.
Yeah.
The more it goes in, you're like, yeah, it's cool.
Frank Olson was
the way they shot all that stuff is like so cool.
Frank Olson is a CIA scientist he's part of MKULTRA. He's part of Operation Artichoke. That was the early stages of MKULTRA when we're still trying to use it as a bioweapon. And he was also originally one of like the disease.
Operation Artichoke was what exactly?
Operation Artichoke was using LSD as a bioweapon.
Got it.
In 1953, they switch it to MKULTRA, and MKULTRA is using it as a mind control weapon.
Right.
But it's all the same team. It's all the same people.
Yeah, they just switched the MO.
It's still Sidney Gottlieb in front of them. So Fort Detrick in Maryland is basically their base of operations for all of this. And Frank Olson is a scientist at Fort Detrick. Sidney Gottlieb is his immediate boss. And one weekend, they have a weekend retreat in the woods. And Sidney Gottlieb, it may have been as a prank. He claimed that it was a legitimate experiment. I tend to believe more that he thought it would be funny to lace his colleagues' drinks with LSD. He himself used LSD a lot. He laces his fellow scientists' drinks with LSD.
Are you talking about in the dock in the moment when they're at that like house thing?
Yeah.
And what was the pretense that they were setting that up as, like a work getaway sort of deal?
It was supposed to be a work getaway.
Right.
Basically a work weekend retreat.
And the idea is that did they just choose Frank Olson to
No, he laced everybody's drink with LSD, including himself.
So the contention is that for whatever reason Frank Olson reacted in such a way that was different from everybody else?
Not so much he reacted differently. It's kind of that after he's drugged with it himself, he kind of has this awakening about it.
Frank Olson does.
Right.
Everybody else is kind of still on board.
Frank Olson, after being drugged with it himself, is no longer on board with this.
Right.
And he goes into like a really deep depression. He doesn't want to sleep. He's having trouble eating or drinking anything because like his wife would say every time I put food in front of him, he'd think that it was laced with LSD and he never wanted to eat anything.
Fucking horrible.
And he's really miserable and depressed. And he comes to his supervisors and he says, I don't want to be a part of the CIA anymore. These experiments that you're doing with LSD, I don't want any part of it anymore. And
that's all like documented, official, like.
Yeah, that's all documented, official.
Okay.
They ask him to basically see a psychiatrist before deciding anything, because he is depressed and he is not eating and he is acting erratic. So they ask him, before you make the official decision of if you want to quit or not, we have like a CIA approved psychiatrist in New York City. You're going to go there with two of your fellow colleagues, and we just want you to sit with this psychiatrist before you make any decisions. In Stephen Kinzer's book, they said people close to that case later admitted that the psychiatrist that they sent him to, his main instructions were find out if Frank Olson is going to go public or not.
And this psychologist was in New York?
Yeah, it was in New York City.
Yeah, so that would be when he first goes to New York.
Yeah. It's really only one trip to New York.
Didn't they go back to DC at one point and then back? It's not really important to the overall.
They're planning on going back to DC the next day.
Oh, right.
It's right before Thanksgiving, and Frank Olson he calls his wife after the psychiatrist meeting, and it at least seems from their phone call that he has every intention of going back to DC to see them for Thanksgiving.
Right.
It is, people in the CIA later admitted that like that psychiatrist was there to kind of see if Frank Olson is going to basically come public about the fact that they've been testing LSD on people unwittingly. But they said that they had come to the conclusion that Frank Olson wasn't going to reveal anything, that he wasn't planning on going public, and Frank Olson himself agrees to go into a mental health facility. That he's going to
So
go.
who thought he was going to go public?
It's not that they thought he was going to, they were worried that he was going to.
No, I know, but the psychologist might have thought he was.
Psychologist might have thought he was. Sidney Gottlieb definitely was worried about it.
Right. But he never told anyone that he intended on that.
He never told anybody about the LSD. He never told.
No. But he never told anyone he was gonna go public.
No, he never.
To our knowledge.
To his knowledge,
Yeah.
but the CIA was definitely worried about it.
Yeah.
He has a conversation with his wife. He expects to be home on Thanksgiving, and then after that, he's going to go into a mental health facility. According to his wife, he was actually like excited about going to a mental health facility, and like he was talking about like, oh, I'm going to catch up on a lot of reading there, and I feel like this is going to be really good for me.
Yeah.
And then that night, he falls through his hotel window to his death.
Right.
Falls through the glass. So
What's the big deal?
Let's say it's a suicide. He doesn't bother to open up the window. He jumps through the glass of the window.
Right.
Down
Because
several stories.
It's not painful enough, so
to kill himself.
yeah.
Or the CIA psychologist came to a different conclusion and said that this guy is going to go public and that we can't trust this guy to keep our secrets, and that they decided that night to murder him.
Yeah, or if they even just suspected it.
Or if they even just suspected it and said, why take the chance?
Right.
According to the documentary Wormwood, they don't even really bother to like entertain the idea that it was a suicide. They more or less watching that, they are pretty heavy of saying he was murdered.
Well, also there's documentation around that time specifically saying that the CIA's intent, like preferred method of assassination, was exactly what happened.
To throw someone at the window,
hit them with a blunt object and throw them out the window
and say
make it look like suicide. Exactly.
Yes. In this book, I mean, they leave it open-ended. They make the case that, like, yes, he was depressed and acting erratic, and he could have killed himself. But, I mean, I don't know how you can come to any other conclusion other than he was murdered.
Well, I mean, especially because they did do that, you know. And I don't know who is documenting it in the documentary, but again, they were doing that. That was their preferred method of assassination at the time. And, you know, you got motive, and you have physical evidence of going through the window.
Right.
You know, and then in the film they show that they resurrected the body and a medical examiner determined it was murder. Now, I guess you could, you know, depending on if you believe a medical examiner that's like working on the behalf of the prosecution, essentially. Not that there was a criminal trial, because there wasn't. But it's interesting. I mean, the doc shows how basically even after that, the government is, you know, essentially working to silence the family as far as making it appear that they're, you know, copping to kind of they're basically saying it was a experiment that went wrong.
Yeah, well, that's what the CIA's basically like official narrative is.
Yeah.
Of that, we are, they're not admitting to a murder, but
No.
they're saying basically we are responsible for his death because
Indirectly.
because we did this experiment and didn't consider the after effects, that we could be seriously affecting this guy's mental health.
Yeah.
Either way you look at it,
And we
the
threw him through a
CIA is
fucking
guilty.
window.
And we threw him out the fucking window, by the way.
Yeah, no.
But it's after 53 that MKUltra is all about mind control. Not only mind control, but they kind of had this idea of what's called a Manchurian Candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Famously, after there's the movie Manchurian Candidate, which was inspired by this event of these captured soldiers in Korea who said America was committing war crimes.
Right.
And everyone said they were brainwashed. In Manchurian Candidate, it's kind of... MKUltra wasn't public at this point, but the basic story of the Manchurian Candidate is the story of MKUltra. It was this guy who was given these brainwashing drugs, and basically when he hears a code word, he turns into an assassin. More or less, that's what their goal was, to make someone who was a killer and didn't realize that they were a killer. And Manchurian Candidate is kind of the first piece of media that's inspired by this, but like even as recently as like the new Marvel show Falcon and Winter Soldier, like Winter Soldier is basically he's a brainwashed assassin from this government experiment that when he hears a code word, he goes into assassin mode. Yeah. And more or less what they were saying in these fictional narratives was what the CIA was trying to do at the time. In the late 50s and into the 60s, there's Operation Midnight Climax, which we talked about on our Chaos video, which was basically... Not only was there these black sites internationally where we were experimenting on people, they were also doing it here in America. In federal prisons, famously Whitey Bulger was part of the MKUltra experiments. To a lesser extent in colleges, the poet Allen Ginsberg was a victim of MKUltra. And also you had Operation Midnight Climax, which there were two different kind of brothels. One was in New York City and one was in San Francisco.
At the clinic or whatever, right?
The Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic.
Where did they have the the two-sided window? Or whatever?
That was an an apartment in the Haight-Ashbury area, San Francisco. The medical clinic isn't mentioned at all in this book because there's no actual proof that the Free Medical Clinic was a part of MKUltra. Tom O'Neill in Chaos claims that it was,
and it closed right after his book.
But also, officially, MKUltra has ended in 1962. The Free Medical Clinic doesn't show up till years after that. So if you go by the official narrative, then the Free Medical Clinic in Haight-Ashbury couldn't have been part of MKUltra. There were CIA scientists there who were doing some LSD experiments, but it couldn't have been part of the same
CIA, LSD.
Well,
it's the same shit.
Because also they never admitted that they were doing it on people there. They admitted that they said they were doing it on mice. So, but that's
like the CIA is not in the business of telling the truth to civilians. That's also, period, point blank.
Which is why Tom O'Neill in his book says it didn't end in 1962. That these experiments went on into the 60s, possibly into the 70s. I do say that if these LSD experiments continued past 1962, Sidney Gottlieb was no longer in charge. He had passed it off, possibly to Jolly West, who's a character in Chaos, who Jolly West was a CIA scientist who was basically underneath Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney Gottlieb, as far as the story goes, in 1962 goes to his superiors and says, MKUltra is a failure. Mind control and brainwashing aren't possible. And throughout the 60s, Sidney Gottlieb becomes kind of the poison expert for the CIA. There's an assassination attempt on the president of the Congo that he created a poison for that ended up being a failure kind of before it even like reached off the ground. There are several assassination attempts on Fidel Castro that he created poison for. So after 62, if you don't, MKUltra may have been around in some form, but Sidney Gottlieb probably wasn't running the show anymore. It may have been like, for the most part, it was done, but there were still some like smaller experiments going on. Because also something that people should understand about MKUltra is that these smaller experiments didn't realize they were part of a larger project. Like,
what would that overall larger project be?
MKUltra.
Just mind control?
Yeah. Of the people in federal prison who were being told by the CIA to use LSD on their prisoners didn't realize that the CIA was also using LSD on all these other experiments. There wasn't so much connection between like the smaller experiments in MKUltra. There wasn't so much of like a communication between everybody. A lot of these LSD experiments didn't even realize that they were LSD funded, that they were CIA funded.
You know, I'm always curious as to like how that chain of communication can remain like in a secret, essentially. Like I'm saying, like I don't understand how. Like, take for instance another thing the CIA is heavily involved in, which is a case that I'm obsessed with, which is TWA Flight 800,
right? Which
was, you know, a passenger plane out of JFK in 1996 on its way to Rome, that exploded off of Long Island. You know, the official narrative from the first of all, a plane crash the CIA and the FBI is never involved. It's the NTSB. In this particular instance, the CIA and the FBI were involved. The FBI basically bullied the NTSB out of the investigation, and you know, the official finding is that there was a center wing tank explosion, even though there's literally hundreds of witnesses that saw it get hit with a missile. Or multiple missiles.
No way.
So,
if you're, most people, well, I don't know about most people. A lot of people on Long Island are very familiar.
And there's a lot of other evidence, and we won't get into it because that's not what this episode is about. But the point is, a lot of people, when they push back on the missile theory, which in my opinion is not a theory but is a fact, is that when they push back on it, they go, well, because that theory, I'll call it a theory for now, is that the U.S. Navy accidentally did it. You know, which, by the way, the U.S. Navy was in the area doing experiments. It's kind of like the lab leak theory, where it's like, well, it was right there. But anyway, they always push back on it and say like, well, like someone would know and someone would say something, but no, I mean, look at JFK. That's never been, you know, officially solved.
Right.
Look at something like this. There are ways that they can kind of, those redundancies in communication are put in there. You know, like I don't know. To me, it seems like wouldn't word get out, but for some reason,
I feel like things like this are purposely done this way, where there's very little communication,
right?
So that people can kind of, so that it's harder to piece things together.
Yeah, or it's like
if the smaller webs are not communicating with each other, then it's hard to basically form the bigger web, like try to put them together in a bigger web.
Actually,
that might not be a great analogy.
Some mafia families operate like that. Like there's word,
exactly.
There's word that the Genovese operates exactly like that, and which is why they're successful, because even people don't even know. Some people don't even know who's made and shit.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, it's also the sort of thing where it's like, well, if I don't tell you this, then if you're ever in a deposition or called to testify, you actually have a natural reaction, which is, I don't know this. You're not on the stand lying, which protects you from X, Y, or Z. Like, so but it's like, you would think now, especially, like, how can they possibly protect secrets in the government? But yet they do.
Yeah. Well, it gets into, the 70s. It gets in the 70s, of basically in 1972, Sidney Gottlieb's officially retired. And he goes and he believes he's going to spend his retirement just relaxing and forgetting that MKUltra ever happened. You know, apparently he like becomes actually like kind of a hippie, and he's like living in like very small town, kind of quiet. He's like into yoga and all that stuff. And it's only 1 year later that MKUltra becomes public.
Right.
Watergate happens, and because of Watergate, a lot of files that were classified are now becoming public. Around this time also, COINTELPRO becomes public knowledge, because now people have all these files of what the CIA and the FBI were doing. So COINTELPRO becomes public, and so does MKUltra. And people in the early 70s who they went to some apartment and someone gave them something and they started feeling weird, or people who are in federal prison, like Whitey Bulger, who are like, hey, wait a minute, they were giving me some drugs that were made me feel exactly like how LSD is described. Or you have people like, I just said his name, the poet.
Allen Ginsberg, who, by the way, is he like a pedophile or some shit?
Oh, is he? I don't
know. I thought I heard that.
I don't know. But
whatever. I mean, not whatever.
Yeah,
like, if that's true,
I
fucking,
actually have no
that's
idea.
terrible.
All right, then fuck him.
I don't know. I might have made that up.
All these people are coming forward, realizing that they were part of this experiment, and it's very quickly and it's very clear that the CIA wants Sidney Gottlieb to be their fallback guy, to be their fall guy. To pin it,
they're just like the goddamn mafia, dude. They fucking use you and then
Sidney
throw you
Gottlieb.
out.
And Sidney Gottlieb basically spends his entire retirement, because in 1975, the Church Committee is created. Church Committee is created to basically find out what was MKUltra, what was the extent of it, and who is responsible. And the CIA had this idea of basically we're going to paint Sidney Gottlieb as this mad scientist who operated like without checking with authority, who basically ran this program all on his own, and that we're going to try to pin it completely on him. While in reality,
fucking losers.
All the high-ups of the CIA knew exactly what Sidney Gottlieb was doing. He wasn't going around acting on his own authority. Everything he did, he had with permission of the higher-ups.
Bunch of scumbags, dude.
Charges are eventually brought against Sidney Gottlieb. I was trying to look up.
That's terrible.
I was trying to look up exactly what charges were put against him. I couldn't find. I know they were planning on charging him with. I mean, you know, take your pick of like crimes, and like basically he did it, but. Charges are brought against him in 1998. He dies in 1999.
So he enjoyed his retirement. Imagine that, dude. You fucking like, you know, you work like he gave them what they wanted, and then they just fucking used him, man. I mean, I'm not defending the guy. I'm just saying that's how brutal the CIA is.
Exactly, but he dies like a few months before the trial is supposed to start. And
Unreal.
The basic idea of the Department of Justice and the CIA is, well, Sidney Gottlieb is dead. It was his experiment. He was the mad scientist, so there's no reason to continue this anymore.
As far as an investigation or whatever?
An investigation of basically...
Just like when they got David Berkowitz.
It was all Sidney Gottlieb's fault, and he's dead now.
Just like when they got David Berkowitz for a future episode.
For a future.
I mean, it's the same concept, though.
Yeah. And no one else is ever charged with a crime related to MKUltra. Frank Olson's son talked about that in the documentary Wormwood, of just like no one else, and he was just like I want to reopen it, but the thing is like almost everybody who was responsible for this is dead now.
Yeah, I mean, it fucking happened in 1953.
Yeah, so
and they were adults
like,
then.
Even if we wanted justice against who?
No, yeah, exactly.
You know, and it's terrible. Of like, you know, there are people. Yeah, I mean, you talk about like kind of generational trauma of just like there are horrible things that happened in the past.
Yes.
That if you're alive today, you weren't responsible for, but you were benefiting from them. And especially in the CIA, because after in 1973, when all these files are declassified, kind of changed how people thought about the CIA. It's not only that MKUltra is revealed to the public, it's also revealed to the public that during the 50s and 60s, the CIA was performing military coups all over South and Central America.
Which is true.
And it changed the idea of, wait a minute, the CIA is supposed to collect intelligence and that's it. Of like, they're experimenting on people, they're doing military coups. In Guatemala specifically, they did a military coup because the Guatemalan government wanted to kick out the United Fruit Company. So it's like, not only are they committing coups, which they're not supposed to be doing, their intelligence, they're committing coup d'etats on behalf of corporations.
Business, yeah.
Of like, they're involved in business now.
It's like, oh, this country's always been run by corporations.
It changed in the 70s, people's idea of what the CIA is changed. Right. And it made people like rethink of how it caused to like, you know, they claim they made changes in the CIA. They obviously didn't. A lot of people at the higher up got fired and replaced with new people who were like just as scummy. But it kind of turned back the curtain of this intelligence agency that we thought was on our side is not actually for years been behind the scenes pulling things and basically betraying the American trust.
We should talk a little bit about like the son, Frank Olson's son, who's like the main, well, Frank Olson's the main character, but he's the main kind of protagonist of
Frank
the documentary
Olson's
Wormwood.
Son was after 73 when it comes out. It also comes out that there's a CIA scientist who committed suicide in New York, who was involved in these MKULTRA experiments at Fort Detrick. And Frank Olson's son sees that and is like, well, there's
Wait, you're saying oh, yeah, go.
Well, sees that and is like, well, there's no way there's another person besides my father who fits that exact same description.
Right.
And he starts the push after 73 of saying that my father did not commit suicide, that this program MKUltra, my father was murdered in order to keep a secret.
Up until then, what did the family think he passed away from?
Well, they thought it was suicide.
Right.
They were told that he jumped out the window in New York.
But it wasn't until 73 that they learned about the experiments?
They learned about the experiments, and now with the knowledge that Frank Olson knew about these government experiments that the CIA was doing, wanted to quit the CIA because morally he thought it was wrong. With that knowledge, they now came to the conclusion of, my father did not commit suicide. Yeah. My father was murdered in order to keep him quiet.
And his son has basically dedicated his whole life to writing the history books, if you will.
Yeah, he basically did. And it's a shame of just like, we've gotten to the point now where anyone who was responsible is long dead.
Yeah, I mean, he been working on the son, since the 70s. And, when they had the meeting in the Oval Office and the settlement lawsuit and, then digging up the body and different medical examiners. I mean, decades he dedicated of his life, even to this day. And this documentary only came out 4 years ago.
But it led up to charges being brought against Sidney Gottlieb. And then Sidney Gottlieb died right after.
Yeah.
And then nothing.
Yep.
Because I think it's very clear, as soon as word got out about MKUltra, they're like, let's paint this as, oh, the CIA isn't bad. We hired this guy who became a mad scientist.
Of course.
MKUltra was his thing.
It's a fall guy, like you said.
And that's the story.
Yeah. Poisoner in chief.
Stephen Kinzer. He also, one of his first books was Bitter Fruit, which is also really good. It's about the coup d'etat in Guatemala, which I had brought up, which basically the CIA overthrew the Guatemalan government on behalf of an American corporation.
America.
Poisoner in chief, Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA search for mind control, Stephen Kinzer. Also, check out Chaos by Tom O'Neill. Chaos, Charles Manson, The Secret History of the 60s. The CIA and the Secret History of the 60s. We didn't bring up Charles Manson at all because, Charles Manson isn't mentioned in this book.
We also didn't bring up Lady Gaga because Lady Gaga's not mentioned in this book.
Well, I'm saying
Tom
O'Neill clearly thinks that Charles Manson was MKUltra, another MKUltra basically experiment gone wrong. But
same with Lady Gaga.
A whole video about that. So all right, Movies by McManus. So, if you like this podcast,
break it down.
Check out our YouTube channel where we have the video version of this. I do 10-minute breakdowns of kind of whatever piece of media we're talking about. We also have clips from our podcast that we were doing. Like and subscribe. Check us out on social media at Movies by McManus. Check us out on Twitter. Check us out on Instagram. Check us out on Facebook. I'm your host, Greg. My brother, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for the comments and following along. Yeah. We work to bring the show to you every week between the episodes and the podcast, and your support helps a lot. The downloads keep going up.
Yeah.
just, if we grow this thing slowly and steadily, that's totally fine. We're just trying to be consistent, so we appreciate your support. If you haven't had a chance yet, please subscribe to the channel, because it helps us in the algorithm and everything like that.
Exactly.
And keep the comments coming. We want to hear, because it's a discussion. Like, we're not here to just
exactly.
People do honestly, people do leave interesting shit. Like, it's like, all right, I haven't thought about that. So keep staying involved, man. Appreciate it.
And have a good night.